basically, it's made of ramblings, some of my ramblings for the last 2 years in different projects and areas I've been working in related to. So I'll just talk about it. And then you're happy to interrupt and say I'm wrong, or you like it or you don't. Because for me, some experimented a little bit. But this is not working out. It's not moving forward. Now it's moving forward. Sorry, I'm just impatient. Now it's moving too fast. Come on. The story of my life. So let's go back. Wow, it went quite far. So, well, that's me. I'm a reader. What they now call us associate professors, whatever, at the University of West London. I was in Denmark in some kind of sabbatical. Well, it was really for a full year, 16, 17, and then I kept working with them for a little while longer. I've been related to the Open University for many, many years. I did my PhD there. I've been working with, formally collaborating with MITI or ET or different forms and shapes since 2015. I am also work with Pedro in the IFIC Technical Committee 13. So you're Portuguese representative, right? So I'm the UK representative for IT, the Technical Committee 13, which is a UNESCO group, which is like the United Nations of IT. And we are in the ACI chapter.
It sounds serious when you put it like that.
But it is that. It's, I mean, the Technical Committee 13 has 48 countries in that committee sitting there. So it's an interesting gathering. I currently, even though it's pretty non-active, I chair the social technical group for the British Computer Society. And then a lot of my work has also been focused on the developing world or third world or whatever you want to call it. And that's a working group within the bigger T20. So that gives a bit of an idea of what I do. So when I was in Denmark, I came across this paper. I was teaching service design. It's a pretty interesting paper from the International Journal of Design by Guardian. And in that paper, they talk about how we as designers of technology are moving towards new paradigms of what is valued. And then in that paper, which you're welcome to download, and if you don't know, it's really good paper. It's based on Alvin Toffler's waves, technology waves. And then they talk about industrial paradigms and start looking at the industrial economy, the experience economy. And Guardian, back in 2014, he would say that we were mostly standing in this what we call knowledge economy, which is basically epitomized through things like Web 2.0, co-creation, users' right to participate and co-design their own experiences, etc., etc. And how the value of services and these products will be derived by the extent to which users are able to participate and co-participate and co-create experiences. Now, what Guardian said back in 2014, and I think we are largely, there now, is that we're moving towards what he calls a transformation economy, where the design of digital products and services is no longer about just enabling people to co-create and co-participate in the production of technology experiences, but to do it in an ethical way. And then he introduces this concept of ethical value exchange, where it's an invitation for equal sharing of value in the products and services we design and we offer to consumers, to users, etc., etc. And of course, there are many examples where this has come to the fore. I mean, obviously, if you think of Amazon, the case of tax evasion and how the EU has been trying to get them because of the unethical tax evasion, well, sorry, avoidance. Avoidance is not the same, it's avoidance, not evasion. Avoidance practices, or the Cambridge Analytical scandal, right? Where obviously Facebook, how Facebook and the big social media organizations extract value from users without really users being fully aware of how that value is extracted and used, etc., etc. What then Guardian does is frame and design activity within this paradigm of ethical value change, saying that everything we do in order to be recognized as a profession and obviously what happened there? As a practice must be framed within that, and then obviously he breaks it down quite well. I'm not going to go into detail, but I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. Let's wait until this changes. It's quite slow. It's not changing. Hmm?
Sometimes it just takes a while. It's changing now.
Okay, so I might have to download the file because I think
It's downloaded.
It's downloaded.
Yes.
There are two key concepts when talking about AI automation, designing for AI automation from a user experience perspective, and ethical. Look from an ethical perspective. There are two concepts that are important. One is that of privacy, and the other one is one of transparency, right? So these issues of privacy were already well articulated back in the 90s. I mean, one of the most interesting frameworks is the Privacy by Design framework by Anne Cavoukian, and she's actually Canadian. She was the information commissioner for in Canada back in the 90s, 96, 97. And she came up with this framework where she says that any development project, any design project should embed these principles in which privacy should be proactively included, not reactive, should be preventative, not remedial. Privacy must be the default setting in any development project, system development project. It's not embedding into design, must be a positive sum, and shouldn't really be a zero-sum game between privacy and security. There should be obviously end-to-end lifecycle protection, and privacy standards must be visible, transparent, open, documented, and independently verifiable. And obviously, last but not least, it should be user-centric, which is again this idea of the knowledge economy that Guardian was referring to, this third paradigm, right? Because don't forget, this is the 90s, the late 90s, when this framework was kind of presented by Anne. Then a very recent paper presented at CAI back in 2019 by people, all these are researchers from Microsoft in Seattle, I think. They came up with this lead of artificial intelligence design guidelines for UX. And if you look at a lot of those guidelines have to do with transparency. And a lot of those guidelines have to do with privacy. It's really, so for instance, update and adapt cautiously. So limit the drop to changes when updating and adapting the AI systems. Once we select a song, the update, one below keeps it above constant. Encouraging granular feedback. The user can directly mark something as important. The product communicates that handling an ad will adjust relevance of future ads. Show contextually relevant information, searching a movie, types of return short times in the UMI location. So a lot of the concepts embedded in artificial intelligence and machine learning and user experience design have to do with opening that black box. Okay, so I reviewed some papers for the Design Interactive Systems Conference. The last one I was associate chair, and a few of those were on AIX. And there was a particularly good one on Netflix and how what happens if Netflix users find out about the algorithm on the assumptions that the Netflix has about them in showing them what they should be looking at. It's quite interesting because really it's about where do you draw the line in opening that black box. How far should you ethically show that black box? So a lot of that comes into question. And the answer sometimes is an answer that's purely ethical, because obviously it's not in the interest of Netflix to completely show the assumptions they have about you, right? And so on and so forth. But these things go back to the 90s. I mean, this is 1997 or you know, only 50 cents, huh? Well, I guess the real profit's made when you collect my data and sell it to the government. So, because the key thing is not to do with the ability, the computational ability of machines to learn about user behavior and provide response, is the big data behind it. Because AI and machine learning is there because of the ability to process big data, right? And it has to do with what we know, what people, and what we can do about it. So that's why when we look at datification and Internet of Things, we need to go back to this kind of roots that people were joking about 15, 18 years ago. But the point is, obviously, people don't like being watched. Obviously, however, being watched from technological means is quite hard to conceptualize. And obviously, again, this issue that privacy is not an unequivocal concept. Privacy is a concept that is heavily culturally grounded. I just spent some time in China, I'll show you some pictures, and what they mean by private is not what we mean by private, right? So, and then of course we have GDPR. And of course, GDPR guarantees all these things. The right to be informed, the right to data portability, the right to be forgotten, the right to access, the right to rectification, the right to object, the right to restrict processing, and what we call mandatory breach notification. Now, all of this is beautiful in paper, but at the end of the day, it relies on citizens' trust. It relies on the ability of citizens to realize what's happening, in realizing the ability of functionaries or representatives of the state to act on it. So there's nothing really guaranteed. Another interesting book that captures some of what I've been telling you about ethical value exchange and social media is a book by Hamid and my friend Bonnie on information. It's about 2 or 3 years old book now, and they've been written before publishing the book. They've already been talking about publishing a few articles in this concept, which is, as I said, is about how it's a new form of capitalism extracting value from people through the net. And again, they elaborate very well on this concept. Now, even before Bonnie was talking about information, there was Sandra Brandman back in 2011, but she started back in 2010, and there's this book, The Change of State Information Policy and Power, 2012. And the interesting thing about the book is that back at that time she already noticed that the information state is now moving from this idea of the panopticon, which is this French design of jails, you know, where the guards can potentially see all the prisoners, but the prisoners do not know whether they're being looked at, being observed, right? So you have this idea of being surveilled, but you're not absolutely sure. So you're going from that to a society which is more of a, because of big data, datification, machine learning, etc. We're going from that to what she calls the pan-spectrum, which is a much more powerful control mechanism, where it's no longer one person observing, but many people observing many people at the same time. So, and of course, I mean, an amazing example is the Chinese. They do it very well. Remember this? Was it 90s film or early 2000? With what's the name of this guy? The Top Gun actor, the short guy.
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise. It was Minority Report. Remember? Well, the Chinese people, they have Minority Report devices. I mean, all around Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong with the protests. They can actually profile people quite easily. So it's quite scary. And when I was in China a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I took the bullet train from Beijing to Dalian because I just wanted to experience the fast train in China. And they were saying, of course, there was obviously the notice was in Mandarin and in English. And they said, if you are found smoking in the train, you will lose credits in your social credit system. So in other words, it's like your entire life as a civilian in China is like you've had a driver's license, where you lose, in the UK you lose points, no, they add points. But it's the same, but they do it not only with the way you drive, they do it with everything you do in life. Even if you do have more than 2 children, you lose points and you have to pay a fine. So they potentially know everything they have to do. And if you breach the rules in your conduct in the Chinese railway system, you get penalized and you can even be banned from taking the train for a year or 2. And they have the ways to know it. I mean, I've been going to China since 2007, and it's amazing how in 12 years they have digitized all sorts of things, especially public transport, so to the extent that they know much more about their own citizens than they know about themselves. So it's quite interesting. Again, and then the offshoot of this is that Habermas, which is this French, German philosopher, used to say that mass media annihilated the ability for society to be dialogical, to have a true democracy where you have a dialogue. And then Marshall McLuhan said that once we had something that looked like the internet, I mean, with Marshall McLuhan, Canadian by the way, he said, okay, as soon as we have media that allows people to provide an equal two-way communication, then we'll be able to restore that democracy. But the reality is, what Sandra Brahman says, is that because of the way in which the state has, and also not only the state, but powerful organizations like Facebook, Amazon, Google, the way they can leverage and manipulate data flows makes that democracy an illusion. Okay? So the technology issues involving the collection and personal information to be used for political purposes are ever less intelligible to citizens, and hence cannot be contested. So, and the result is that citizenry that is less and less capable of participating in decision making that can be meaningfully described as democratic. So this is an interesting reflection. That's why I'm rambling a bit, I know, because I'm going to move towards notification and information state, but I felt it was important to talk about that since I'm here. So the result is obviously there's a threat to freedom of speech, which mainly rests in stuff like fake news, disinformation, propaganda, and obviously that has poisoned public sphere. Cambridge Analytica, now Trump is also part of the Trump's impeachment inquiry is actually around this a lot. A lot of what's happening with Trump's inquiry is around connected to things like that. Now, and the reality is, what is quite scary is that a good number of countries, especially Northern Europe, Western Europe, is moving towards this digital authoritarianism by embracing the Chinese model of extensive censorship and automating surveillance systems. And obviously, if you look at the World Economic Forum, I think these figures were presented there, but the result is that the Global Internet Freedom Index has been declining for the 8th consecutive year. And it's been declining, if you look at this, and then you just go online and have the rate at which it's declining in the Western, say, in the Western world, is much faster than in Eastern countries. Which is quite interesting, right? So the internet freedom is being lost at a rapid pace. So the question is, will the emerging Internet of Things increase the use of artificial intelligence, big data, surveillance techniques, inevitably result in Western versions of the Chinese social credit system? I don't know. Maybe. But then, when I talk about privacy being culturally grounded, it refers to the fact that, of course, many Chinese approve, it's normal, it's natural, because that's where they grow in. And China is so big that 80% of Chinese citizens will never leave China. Okay, we're talking about 1,400 million people, so it's quite a lot of people. So what is private here for us is not private for them, not necessarily. What is private for Portuguese people is not private for British people in many ways. And it changes, that concept changes. So the challenge is, how do you keep those concepts as you move from one concept to another, and when you're designing, you make that usable for people in charge of making decisions. I mean, there are a number of examples of unfairness. Some people end up in passenger blacklists in the US by accident, and they get stopped. So, for instance, if you bought, I'm sure it's still happening, but if you bought a flight in the last 10 years in cash in an airport, you're automatically in the US Custom Border Protection blacklist. So they will stop and search you if you pay for a flight cash, because they'll be automatically suspicious of that, for obvious reasons, right? Again, what is, I mean, the government agencies, the what CBP will say, well, it's tough luck, but is that ethical to restrict freedom? And there's this balance, you know, between restricting freedom and protecting the, you know, a much bigger collective. So where do you draw the line once more? And as designers, we're faced with these type of decisions, right? So then you have, obviously, with smart cities, it's the same. The more you know, especially in India, there's quite interesting examples. I've been working with a colleague at the University of Bradford. He's been working closely with in Pune and in Hyderabad. The thing is, with the smart cities, with the smart cities, all sorts of data can be gathered, and even though in theory it's anonymous, you have so much data about, that you use to profile how people live their lives, that you can actually end up identifying who they are. So again, it's similar type of questions. In the case of India, some local governments have invested so much money in automating and illuminating the way in which they live, and they don't have enough water to live on. So these villages don't have enough water pumped. So there are imbalances. Yeah, so that's what I just said. Now, I just want to, since we're talking about India, I just want to tell you a few some case studies I've been working with. And before that, I just wanted to finally define what I mean by ethical value exchange. So fundamentally, it's about an understanding of ethical implications and transactions in design decisions affecting human agency and experience. Okay, so that's the key thing, right? And that's the key motto that people like Google, Facebook, or any people designing technology will need to consider from the Guardian's paper perspective when we're talking about ethical value exchange. So, and again, I'm not planning to give you a crash course on ethics in 2 minutes, but fundamentally you have a different ways of looking at ethics, okay? So one of the ones we are most familiar with, almost like when we talk about psychology and we talk about neurosis and psychoanalysis, which is what most common people know about psychoanalysis, right? I mean, psychology is much bigger than psychoanalysis. It's the utilitarianism ethic model, where basically it's a cost-benefit analysis. So whoever gets a decision that benefits the greatest number of people, then that's the right decision. And you have like the trolley problem or the train problem, where you have to pull a lever. You have a train, you have 5 people in the rails, and you have 1 people. Where do you pull them? Who are you going to kill? So that type of ethical dilemmas, right? Then you have the existentialism ethics perspective. You can see Amanda Lackersmith, she's done a great work on that. And again, it's a much more depressing view of ethics, and has to do with the finitude or the limited nature of humanness, and the fact that we will at one point die, and how considering death or considering the end makes us think about life in different ways, and in turn that will make us make the right type of ethical decisions. And then of course you have feminist ethics and ethics of care. Obviously you have quite a few people there in the area, even though as much as reason is a crucial way of knowing, especially with regard to ethics, it's a matter of sustainable relationship, so is care and emotions are also important. So it's not just about rational decisions, it's also about emotional decisions. And then you have obviously Van Fischer, you have this care about design, which is an interesting example of that. And it's this idea of the Good Samaritan, in which ethics go beyond the minimal requirements of prevailing law practices. So it's a much more emotional view on ethics. Then you have deontology, and again, that's one of the most common ones nowadays, as well as virtue ethics. And then in this one, people are conceived as autonomous individuals, having the ability to exercise their own rights around life, liberty, pursuit, etc. And it's a near absolute to be protected, no matter what benefit might otherwise accrue. So, the best example of deontological ethics in systems development practice, can you guess? What system development methodology would be fundamentally deontological? It's very easy to answer. That empowers developers to do whatever they feel they have to do, and they can change things if they have to. And Agile. If you look at the Agile Manifesto, it's fundamentally a deontological manifesto in terms of ethics, because it gives, and also socio-technical system principles, it gives software development teams the ability to be autonomous and to make their own decisions as they go. So you have the design sprints or the scrums, and every week or 2 weeks you can change. So that's a fundamentally deontological perspective. Then, of course, we have virtue ethics, which have to do with, okay, those virtues that are defined to be ethical, and again, and they are seen as a requisite to convey carry good life, community harmony, etc., etc. And then what you see is it reflects a lot of Eastern values that are being now adopted and increasingly questioned. So, what you see then nowadays is there's been a remarkable shift over the past decade in ethics. And we have moved away from a more utilitarian, and to some extent deontological approaches, to a much more deontological and virtue ethics approaches, right? So, especially if you look at professional bodies like IEEE, ACM, Code of Ethics and Code of Practice, you will see a lot of that is manifested there. So, there's the IEEE one. The problem with all of these Code of Ethics is that they don't provide developers or researchers with handles. They just say, okay, these are the ethical values we must pursue, and that's about it, right? This doesn't really give them a concrete script of how things should be done so that you are following ethical conduct. Another interesting example is if you've been following the ACM SICAI when you're submitting a paper and you have to define a gender identity. And there are like now 12, they turn to be politically correct, so there are like 12 different gender identity possibilities, right? So they're trying to be, yeah, it's got to be crazy, right? So we're just trying to but that's the key thing. Now, moving to this Indian case study I wanted to talk about. This is something we published in the ACM Interactions last year, I think, 2018. And this is a trip we made to India, and we were invited to evaluate this mobile fishing app called M-Krishi, developed by Tata and sponsored by the Indian government and the Institute of Oceanic Services. In fact, that's my photos I took there. And so, what we did there is we actually evaluated the usefulness of that system for the fishers from a socio-technical perspective, right? And the key question of concern there was how the experience of these fishers was affected by a system supporting and automating open data access. So, in this case, the automation is seen as replacing the fish sticking activities. And instead of doing that, basically the app tells them where the fish is. As simple as that, right? So just to give you an example, an idea where we were, so this is Mumbai, this is India, this is Maharashtra. So Alibag is not that far from Mumbai, but it took us about 4 hours to get there because it was just after the monsoon. So this is a fishing village and a sea resort at the same time. So, and this is how they represent their project. Before M-Krishi, you had the fishers would go out to the sea one day, night, second day, finally, you find the fish, you come home, right? But now with M-Krishi, you can just straight to where the fish is, so you can see, right? There's no need to go. And that sounds quite beautiful, right? But of course, as with any of these things, there's always something sinister around this. So when we started talking to the fishers and to the fishing societies and the local community, they said, yes, of course, we were invited to do user testing and usability evaluations of the interface. So this is the application, right? So there were things like, oh, what icon would you like to have? Do you understand this icon? Do you understand this map? So the participation of the fishers was heavily scripted, right? Like usability testing. So, yeah, so PF set means potential fishing zone, map, data. So that's one of the screens. So the thick black lines means these are areas where you can find bands of fishes, or fish, not fishes, fish. And of course, what you have in the landing center in Alibag is that you have a small fishers like this, or you have much bigger boats that have cranes and radars, etc., etc. Now, what happened is that the knowledge of where the fish is was a knowledge transfer from father to son, from son to grandson. And it was based on some kind of local knowledge that has been protected by all these families over the years. And each family had their own belief about the effectiveness of their knowledge. And they were proud of that. Okay? So suddenly everyone knows where the fish is. Okay, so that's, in a way, it's a violation of privacy, of their privacy. It's like if you're Italian, right? So in Italy we go in September hunting for mushrooms. I'm sure you do that yeah. So everyone knows, each family has its own secret spots of where are the mushrooms. Especially in my mom's hometown, Cossano Mutri, they do have a mushroom fair. It's called Sacra dei Funghi. It's a whole week of eating just mushrooms in different forms and shapes. Even mushroom hamburgers is silly. Anyway, imagine suddenly that there's an app that tells all people in Cossano Mutri, where are the mushrooms? They feel violated. I'm being a bit dramatic, but in a way it is. So again, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that Dr. Singh and the people at Tata were being unethical willfully, but there were consequences to such an act. So, and what happened was that, not just that, now, because of this fact that everyone knew where the fish was, now the smaller boats could go further. Because they have diesel, limited diesel, but now they know where the fish is, so they can go further. So they started going where the big boats used to fish. They entered big boat territory, right? Because they can go, and the big boats in retaliation start fishing where the small boats fish. So it's it's one of these intended consequences, right? And it has to do with the fact that there was no real consideration of that fishing village as a kind of an ecosystem with different levels, and there was no real participation. So, as I said, despite intense co-design activities led by Tata, the App Solutions AI places more emphasis on replacing existing fishing practices and individual fishers subjective of the world, division of labor and previous knowledge. So, rather than complementing it. So the mobile app is a critical touch point and has empowered the fishers rather than regulated their practices, but it hasn't taken into account the wider, more complex service ecology and the stakeholders surrounding fishing practices. Okay, so it was not introduced in the best way possible, right? It didn't really take into account all this division of labor. So obviously, from the fishers and the government, from the Tata perspective and the Indian government perspective, Dr. Singh, who is the guy who created the algorithm, he refined the algorithm over 15 years to the point that the algorithm is nearly very, very accurate. For Dr. Singh, he's proud that how effective his algorithm is. For Tata, they're proud they have a stable app running on a cheap Android phone that doesn't crash. But from a fisher's perspective, from the fisher society perspective, they have had to reaccommodate a lot of their livelihoods and the ways in which they fish in order to make it sustainable. So for instance, what they do is typical socio-technical stories. Not different from the ones that in the 1940s and the 1950s took place in India, in Hyderabad, when the socio-technical theory was invented. Basically, what the fisher societies are doing is they now have to control who gets to fish when and where. So they become policemen, regulating fishing practice in order to make this workable, right? So, so what's the benefit? I mean, there is a benefit, but now there hasn't been an authentic ethical and socio-technical consideration from their perspective. So, as I said, it is somewhat of a dilemma that the app may make fishing a less sustainable way of making a living by automating the process to identify the fish location for the very reason that it's useful and useful. So, and this is precisely, this case that is at the core of the message I'm sending. It is, what are our responsibilities when we do research and we work in this area, right? So that's one example of a project I was somewhat involved in. Now there's another example where I'm currently, it's a project we're currently working with. I'm working with the innovation unit at Heathrow Airport, and we're looking at the use of robots to support passengers. So that's a robot. But now they are trialing the robots in the Compass Center, which is the admin offices of Heathrow Airport. And we're working with visitors. And again, they're trying to experiment, they're trying to kind of think about, okay, what are the implications of deploying a robot? Okay? So we're surveying some of the users. So, I mean, typical question, how to foster users' trust in following direction, how to motivate passengers, visitors for the task, how to draw the line between the task and responsibility between the human counterpart and the robot. And again, Heathrow, the Heathrow Innovation Unit, they can add anything they want in terms of automating a state-of-the-art technology. That's not the problem. The problem is how to do it. That's the biggest challenge, how to do it. Because they've tried all sorts of things. At some points they had holograms. You know what a hologram is? Like Star Wars. Hologram in the security queue showing people, and that didn't work, they didn't go well, these holograms instead of humans, for different reasons. Because Heathrow has a problem. Heathrow, as an organization, has to keep three things. They have to keep, of course, they have to automate as much as they can, but they have to keep service quality benchmarks. And they know from experience that the more they automate, the more the service quality benchmarks are compromised. And don't forget, they compete with Charles de Gaulle, they get judged, right? Charles de Gaulle, with Frankfurt, with any big airports, like New York, one of the New York or whatever. So, and the other thing, the other constraint they have is that they have to keep employment levels at around 3,000 Heathrow employees directly, not indirectly. The indirect is many more, but directly they have around 3,000 employees. And they have a commitment with the local borough of Hounslow to keep that level. So it's not like you just can automate and just start firing people. So you have to not only redesign the technical system and not only how to design the behavior, but also you need to redesign the social system, the division of labor. And in order to do that, you need to start kind of thinking, okay, how we do things. I mean, there are other trials we've been involved in. This is a connection kiosk. Obviously, even the translation in Spanish is "Donde está el próximo?" It's totally wrong. The word is like if you're transferring a flight. London is one of the airports in the world with the highest number of connecting flights, almost. There were a number of issues trying to use that, so they ended up having a human helping people, telling them what to do. But the human could tell them just by looking at the screen. Now you go to gate 45, terminal 2. There's no need for the thing, but it's because it's poor. It's because there isn't. This is an example of how a drive to automate a service fails because that lack of consideration that I just told you about. I mean, human counterpart is required. Simple design issue also in the machine. They had to use more posters to how to use the thing. Not really helping passengers, etc., etc. Okay, so we're now moving towards the end. So what I've been doing recently is I went to Dalian to run a workshop on automation and UX. So what I did, I worked with these HCI master students, and I asked them to think about future scenarios for smart universities. Okay, and I asked them to work with these automation UX goals. Much more refined than this, but of course, just to get an idea. Sense of control, trust in human automation cooperation, sense of freedom. Just to get them to think about, okay, how will a smart university look like from a UX perspective, and how will you actually not only do that, but do it ethically? So we did some work. Actually, these goals come from this paper here, right? That looks at work, UX, and automation, and the same intersection. So these are some of the work that we were doing as we were kind of thinking about future scenarios. Quite interesting, even though the storyboards look a bit basic, but actually the type of insights we got from the workshop were quite interesting. And why I did this, the reason why I did this is because we are going to be running these workshops in Heathrow Airport. And we're going to do it with real decision makers that they want to think about what Heathrow in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time will look like. So we're doing future scenarios workshop from a UX automation perspective. Keeping in mind what I just told you, commitment to a commitment to keep a resilient workforce. In other words, don't inspire people. So from an ethical perspective, keeping service quality standards, and obviously automating the best decisions you can have from an Industry 4.0 perspective. So again, and I stole this slide from Torquil, remember? Yeah. This idea of collaboration robots. The key message here is in order to make successful decisions about robot-human interaction from an ethical perspective, a key concept, and this is something that Torquil referred to, is this idea of empathic experience and the ability for robots to understand, the ability for the humans to understand the robot's need for adjustment. It's almost like as a human agent, you're trying to understand the robot's intention. At the same time, the robot should understand your intention as a human. Okay? But these problems, the collaboration between workers and collaborative robots, and empathic experience, as opposed to apathetic UX user experience, this problem is not new. If you read Terry Winograd, 1985, I think, book Understanding Computers and Cognition, they already talk about this problem. The inability of computer systems to have full access to nuanced situations is the inability of computers to understand the meaning of the context of the situation, to understand human behavior. So at the time he used the example of this email system. I think it was called a communicator or something like that, where the experiment was that you would send a message, but on top of the message you would actually send what you were trying to do with that message. Whether you were trying to complain, critique, appraise, celebrate. You would make explicit the intention of the meaning of the action you were doing with your text. So it's not a new problem. So for us as designers, just like opening the black box of Netflix, it's the same. It's about visualizing the intentions of what we're trying to convey with what we design. And that's what the problem is. How do we actually make those decisions? How do we actually become empathic and ethical in obviously designing interaction with automation, with automated agents or AI agents or whatever you want to call them? To what extent should we show that black box? I think it's an interesting question. Yeah. So we need to broaden our range of human-technology relations to more than interaction and UX. We need to include collaboration, empathy, care. And this comes down to, and this is the final slide, I think, I hope, virtue ethics. Okay, so there's a need for interaction designers to acquire and practice the virtues required for sustaining and enhancing end users' relational autonomy in an automated identified society. So, and that has to do with, going back to Valor's work, honesty, self-control, humility, justice, empathy, care, civility, etc., etc., etc. And obviously embed democratic norms. Well, the question remains, of course, how? I don't have an answer for that. I'm working with Heathrow just to see whether I can find an answer from a Heathrow perspective, right? So hopefully, I think my talk was a bit rambling a bit, kind of get you to think about these things. And of course, I thanks to my friend Charles in Oslo and Irina in ITU, who's now moving to Copenhagen, actually. So, anyways, that was all. Yeah, that's the talk. So, if you have any questions or comments? Any questions, comments? You don't agree? Do you agree? too much for after lunch. Have you been involved in similar projects or problems?
Well, yes, I've been involved in similar projects, and thanks for an enlightening after lunch talk, José,
On a Friday.
on a Friday. Yes, speaking about justice.
But you're talking about,
Yeah.
go on.
No, I was going to say, for me, it all boils down to the issue of trust.
But what is trust to Chinese when we have distrust for us? It's like privacy.
Yes, also it. You could rename the talk as designing for trust.
Yeah, you could. It's the other side of the coin, but again, I think that there's always an ethical question around how much should users know about how much we know about them. For instance, for companies like say Netflix, for instance. I mean, even the air safety. You know, Philippe Palan's presentation when talking about the Boeing 737 MAX crash, where there's an assumption about what the pilots can and cannot do, and how, thanks to that assumption, the plane crashed because of a faulty sensor, and the autopilot coming in. So they were literally fighting the machine to keep that nose up, because the nose kept being pulled down because of a misinterpretation. So I think it's, of course, that's an extreme example. But again, even if it doesn't look like we have that power, I think when an organization like Heathrow Airport comes to you and says, help me draw that line between automation and augmentation, user engagement, worker engagement, because we're also it's not just the passenger's perspective. They talk about future scenarios, also looking at baggage handlers, security personnel, check-in staff, you know, it's looking at the work. I mean, to be honest, three-fourths of what they care is the workers, and a quarter is the passengers. Because a lot of the automation processes, the ones that get the most exposure to it, is the people working there. I mean, I'm not sure if you had the opportunity of going, I had the opportunity to go behind where all the baggage handling takes place. And it's amazing. I mean, it's just like, it looks like Star Wars film. You're working not like, not an airport like, I don't know, like maybe like this airport. But Heathrow, it's like, it's amazing. It's like, it's so automated. But there's still human agents, because the machine will not always, there are always issues. So you will always need people there. For stupid things such as a luggage falling down the belt to one side, there has to be someone there to put it back in. And automation can also, you know, things can get wrong, can go wrong. So, but anyways.
So how are you evaluating the installations in Heathrow?
Well, what we're doing is now thinking about future scenarios for with this idea of Industry 4.0, which is really automation and machine learning, and we're using this. We're using. Sorry. What did I do? Parisa, you're a PhD student.
It's also
He's a co-supervisor, right? In theory. We're using this criteria, but also there's another one.
So like a checklist?
Yeah, but what we're doing is we're doing future workshops. Focus group looking at future workshops with different stakeholders.
And then what do you do with the different future scenarios that come up?
Then that helps the innovation unit steers investment in particular areas of the airport.
The guys with the money?
Yeah. So the outcome of the workshops will hopefully tell them how and where to spend the money, to put it bluntly. Because then they can think, because when you run this workshop, you have like passengers representatives, you have technicians, you have marketing people, so you have different stakeholders taking place in this code, let's call it co-design workshops, where they start thinking about what the possibilities are. Fundamentally, the questions are, what are the possibilities and where do you draw the line between automation and augmentation, passenger engagement? Always keeping in view these three elements, which is keeping a resilient workforce, maintaining your service quality benchmarks, and optimizing the use. It's like minimum critical specification. So in other words, you get the most of the state of the art without compromising the other two goals, which is resilient workforce and service quality.
So it's very utilitarian.
Yeah, could say. Yeah, you could, from an ethical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could say that. But I think it's an achievement in itself that Heathrow is actually considering these matters without having a technocentric view. Because the other airports might have I don't know this for a fact, but the other airports might have a very technocentric view of how to solve these things. And a lot of that is trial and error. And a lot of what Heathrow does is trial and error. I mean, I think the best example, security queues in airports. Those of you who have had the opportunity to travel around the world, you can see so many permutations in which security, I mean, at the end of the day, there's an obligatory, using sociology of technology jargon, there is an obligatory passage point, OPP, which is the scanner, right? So everything dies. You cannot get rid of the scanner, right? You have to go for the scanner. But the ways in which they manage the queues, the procedures, if you have a big tray or a small tray, or if you split the queues in 5 or 1, it's amazing how so many, and how people think about how they should design these queues. And in some of the design, and how you design those people flows, they will see, you could actually see the underpinning goals and the underpinning values. Because if you focus too much on safety and scrutiny and security, you will compromise the experience of the passenger, right? So in some cases, you can say it's like a continuum, right? So if you're really excruciatingly exhaustive with the scanning, come on, the experience of the passenger will self-destroy. And if you go to the other end, if you're very lax and stuff, you're compromising the passenger security. And then as you go from one country to another, you can see patterns. Like in South Africa, for instance, you can take domestic flights and you can take a 5-liter bottle of rum inside, and it's okay. You can do that. And it's all very quick for domestic flights. But in leaving New York, it's painful. Copenhagen Airport, which is not that big, the Castro, it has a really nice compromiser. So, and then you can talk to, I had a student in Denmark, she used to work for the airport, Copenhagen Airport, and again, they have these similar problems. You always have to compromise between service quality, efficiency, effectiveness, and the type of innovation you can introduce. And again, innovation is not just around the technology you can use, but it's the relative use of how you use the resources you have in a creative way to obtain the outcome that you go for. So, and these things is the same. This is quite technocentric. And Krish is technocentric. It's a totally technocentric discourse project. It still continues to be very technocentric. And they're learning along on the go. So now the farmers, because this is not just about fishers, it's also about farmers. Yeah. So now they have a much more active, they don't only have a voice, but now they also have a say in the process, right? There's much more participatory design than before, because of experiences like this. Because of people like me telling them, look, this is what happened. Haven't you noticed? Have you talked? By the way, there's, for those of you who are into participatory design, Are you aware of participatory design? So I'm chairing where's the internet here so I can show you?
It's there. It's there.
Ah. This, yes. Yeah. So I think the full paper's dead and gone, but I think you have still have time for short papers. It's taking place in Colombia. If you want to, if you fancy going to Manizales, I'm chairing the Spanish papers. Yeah. Track. So we have a few already in the pipeline. So if you're into this, if you want to propose a workshop, there's a few things taking place. Yeah.
How is the airport?
Yeah. I've never been to Manizales. I don't think there's an airport. I think you need to fly to, probably you need to fly to Bogota and then Medellin and then take a bus or something. Because it's right in the middle between Bogota and Medellin. Or you just fly to Bogota and just take a bus and go to Manizales. And Eje Cafetero. They're good for making coffee. But it's quite interesting anyways. If you're into PD, it's a really nice community. So you will find all sorts of characters there. Including Daniel, remember Daniel? But anyways, yeah. I think we're done, right? I think it's now 2:05, so people can disassemble this band.
Okay, thanks, José.
Thank you.
Thank you.